Welcome, everybody, to the official launch of Purple Thursday, the third Thursday in October, all across Canada. We are so fortunate when we look this way, we can see volunteers from all across Canada. And when we look this way, we have four provinces represented across this head table. We have some professional people joining us today. Angie and I are not professionals. We're the volunteers. This is the co-chair of our Purple Thursday Committee, Angie Smith from Dauphin, Manitoba. I am your MC, and I am the Canadian Royal Purple President for the ensuing year. My name is Sandy Lougheed. Now the professional people who we are so happy to have. Shane Rempel from the Southern Alberta Brain Injury Society. Ashley Brosda from the Brain Care Centre in Edmonton. Tracy Monette from the Saskatchewan Brain Injury Association, Saskatoon. She's actually representing a very important person in this connection because it's Glenda James who trickles all the way through the professional connection that we have. Glenda is in England right now. Her daughter's getting married, and you may well know England just experienced the hottest day it's ever experienced. It was over 40 degrees Fahrenheit in England yesterday. Glenda will not be doing well. And of course, the most important person in today's presentation, Lynn Hogg. First I'm going to ask for Shane and Ashley both to speak. Tracy, are you? Sure? Okay. So, Shane, we're supposed to say women, generally come first, but hey, we know that the best is supposed to come last, so we'll ask you. So we'll ask you to say a few words on behalf of your association.
Well, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Okay. Thanks for having me here. It's an honor and a pleasure to be with you here today. So I'm here to talk a little bit about the Brain Injury Initiative in Alberta and our role in it, us being the Southern Alberta Brain Injury Society. The Alberta Brain Injury Initiative is essentially a collection of regions within the province that are supported by organizations similar to SAVIS that support individuals that are dealing with the effects of brain injury. And as we know, brain injury is often, it is a lifelong condition. It's often an invisible condition. And to access certain support can be very challenging for individuals and the folks that support them. We tend to colloquially refer to them as caregivers. At SAVIS we call them supporters because supporters can take on many different forms. Could be family, could be friends, could be community members. But essentially the initiative seeks to provide supports from a service coordination perspective as well as a rehabilitation perspective. So there are essentially two streams of support, one being that service coordination the other being the supports for community living, which helps with more of the intensive rehabilitation type of service delivery. SABIS, we act as sort of a central navigator for individuals and their supporters to help them access the supports and services they need to thrive in their community. We like to say that we make life easier for brain injury survivors and their supporters. That's kind of our purpose. And so from a service coordination perspective, what that means is we are providing access to community-based supports that can help them thrive. We can provide access to community initiatives to help access food. We focus on housing, like I said, food security. We also help with accessing government supports like AISH or essentially financial supports that they may be eligible, or any other supports that they may be eligible for. We know that living with the effects of brain injury can be quite daunting, whether it's memory challenges or cognition or even communication. A number of different things can occur, and we sort of step in to walk alongside folks to help them along their journey, again, to help them thrive in the community of their choice, to help them, see themselves live the life that they hope to live. And that goes back to everything that we do is rooted in making their lives easier. There are some statistics I can share with you. There was a report in 2019 that the government of Alberta did on brain injury and its effects, but what was striking to me from that report was just the actual prevalence of brain injury. And it was quite surprising to understand how many people are actually living with brain injury in the province. And they estimate there are about 5,000 new brain injuries reported every year, which is remarkable and sad. And those are the ones that are reported. There are a number of folks that do not report for various reasons, or do not access the supports and services that are available because they're thinking that it's not as severe as it needs to be, or there are various barriers. So what we do as a community organization is try to make things accessible for folks and try to help people understand their role in supporting themselves, but also accessing those appropriate supports. It's an interesting statistic just because of the nature of the comparison, and we, in Calgary we often talk about, not comparing or competing conditions. But in that report, it was stated that by 2031, brain injury will be the most prevalent neurological condition in the country. And that is exceeding dementia and Alzheimer's, which I think is pretty striking and very concerning. So organizations like us exist to support, we're folks that are existing with the brain injury currently, but also the sort of wave of folks that are coming ahead, and it's great to see. I'll just take a moment to say it's great to see organizations like the Royal Purple supporting such an initiative. Of course, in a nonprofit world, it's often a hard thing to get resources to support individuals, and we do a lot of what we do with very minimal resources. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of those that are experiencing the effects of brain injury and those that are supporting them for choosing brain injury as your main focus.
Shane, last evening, the members in this room had a little bit of fun with what's called a loony auction, and one of the auctions, the funds Sharon, president of the Alberta Royal Purple Association, is going to present you with one of the checks.
Hi, it's nice to meet you. I've heard your name in and around Alberta here for a bit. It's a great pleasure for me to present on behalf of everybody in this room a check for $353. They had so much fun, and thank you to the members for allowing me to make this presentation. Thank you so much.
For us, the Purple Thursday cause for the Canadian Royal Purple is the specific recognition of the intersection between brain injury and interpersonal violence. Our national cause for our organization is brain injury awareness and prevention. And Purple Thursday represents one kind of brain injury that we really and truly wish to support the survivors. Purple Thursday to a lot of us in here comes right from our heart, that recognition. It's a tough topic in the sense that you wish it never happened. But knowing that it does, and knowing that we can make a difference in that world as volunteers, is really important to our organization and to our volunteers. So our next presenter, Ashley, a few words on behalf of your organization.
Thank you. So I met many of you last night up close and personal, and as you know, my name is Ashley Brosdon. I'm the Executive Director at Brain Care Center in Edmonton. So similar to Shane, Savis Brain Care Center has service navigation, one-on-one support for those living with acquired brain injury. We also have occupational therapy, technology training, counseling, leisure companion programs, support groups, and life skill workshops. I thought I'd just share a little story because I think it speaks to the power of, gathering people with a like-minded purpose in one room. In 2019, we had an annual breakfast where we focused on intimate partner violence and brain injury. And so we had two guest speakers. One was a researcher who was delving into this topic. And from that breakfast alone, we made a connection with the Center for Intimate Partner Violence in Edmonton. And through a collaborative of 4 organizations, ours included, we developed a public education program to deliver to people who work with women in these types of situations, so that they could understand brain injury, the different types of brain injury that you see. So not only traumatic brain injury, but also brain injuries that are caused from strangulation, which are often very underreported as well. And we've been able to deliver that education to hundreds of people in Edmonton and area. And that was a collaborative that just developed because of a moment like this, of people in the same room, focused on the same goal, and really wanting to make a difference in that work. And screening for brain injury is quite critical, right? Knowing just to recognize some of those signs when someone comes to you, which are typically people who are working in women's shelters. They're not typically going to a brain injury association first as their first need, was really, really important. And so we're excited to continue to expand on that work. And it does take, it takes partnerships, it takes people, it takes funds, it takes resources to do that type of work. And so I just want to echo what Shane said. We are extremely appreciative, and we hope that, in everything that we do, we, honor the donations that we've received from you, and that, we can continue to spread the message and focus on this as a major issue in our country. So thank you for your time, and yeah, I'm excited to hear it.
Ashley, you won't have to go home empty-handed either. As you well know, we raised some funds last night for the Brain Care Center.
Hi, once again, Ashley. It's lovely to have you up here. And as you know, you took part in the fun last night. So some of these dollars are yours. Thank you so much. I'd like to present you a check for $300 to take home with you, and know it will help everybody that you can help in this in the world that needs the help. It's so exciting to have such a collaboration. It makes your heart just burst. Thank you.
When we talk about the partnerships, in less than 4 months, 80% of our lodges across Canada signed on to participate in Purple Thursday. Since Purple Thursday doesn't happen until the third Thursday in October, we can go home and really hope that by the time Purple Thursday arrives, 100% of our lodges across Canada will be participating in over 50 communities, taking care bags to the managers of the care centers in their communities. Just a fabulous 4 months of explosion and of caring. I was talking to Lynn, and we were talking about the power of a volunteer and of a volunteer organization. You could hire a professional to pull off and start to advertise a Purple Thursday. And if you did that, maybe one person would know about Purple Thursday, the person who created the banners, or the person who created all of this literature would know. But until this moved out of that professional's office and got out into the world, still only one person would know. That's the power of the volunteers around this room. It's up now to us as volunteers to get into our communities, help our communities to move forward, and help our country move forward. And just think, we have that opportunity, and it's only, 4 more months away. Gives me an extremely great honor and pleasure to introduce our guest speaker this afternoon, Lynn Hogg. And I hope I can call you Lynn. Thank you. Lynn is a PhD candidate and contract faculty member with the Faculty of Social Work at Wilfrid Laurier University, and a research trainee at the Acquired Brain Injury Research Lab at the University of Toronto. She is exploring the gendered experiences of brain injury and the barriers and facilitating factors influencing mental health, a return to work, and social integration encountered by brain-injured persons. Lynn is committed to improving the outcomes for the brain-injured women who are survivors of intimate partner violence through direct practice, innovative research, and professional education. She believes that the increased knowledge and understanding in the community is key. In 2021, she was honored to receive the Neurological Health Charities of Canada's Changemaker Award for her work in IPV-related brain injury. As someone, yes, applause. All right. Somehow in this room we love change makers. As someone with lived experience of brain injury, she has been a guest speaker addressing the issues of disability, brain injury, and marginalization for a variety of international, academic, professional, and community-based organizations. When not working, you can usually find her in the garden or in the stable with her horses. Her work is being generously funded by the Ontario Women's Health Scholar Award. It is a great honor to introduce again Lynn Hogg.
There we go, the brand unmasking me.
Well, that's what you look like.
That is what I look like. There is about half of this face. Can you hear me in the back? Do you need me to use the mic or are you good? Use the mic? Sure. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, super. First let me just say thank you very much. I recognize I'm the only mask in the room. I'm protecting my husband and my 85-year-old father. So I appreciate your generosity of spirit in that and your acceptance. And thank you very much for that incredibly kind welcome. It's an honor to be here. I'm so pleased to come and speak with all of you and to share a little bit about what we do and how we do it and why we do it, so that you can go back into your communities and get involved in this amazing work. Thank you so much for asking us, for taking this on. This is not an easy topic, and I have to say I apologize for what I'm going to tell you over the next 45 minutes. I'm not a very good party trick. I'm pretty depressing, but I'm a fighter, and I know all of you in the room are too, and we can do this together and make a difference. So, as it was mentioned in the opening there, I do have a brain injury, so sometimes I'm a little off the mark. Sometimes the language comes out a little strange. I was injured in a car accident 20 years ago and have taken this work on since then. I'm with Wilfrid Laurier University in Waterloo, Ontario, and I'm also with the Acquired Brain Injury Research Lab at the University of Toronto. I'm in social work, so I tend to get my hands into things and muck around a little bit, and I'm always late. Isn't that what we decided earlier? That's true, I am always late. So mostly this slide deck is to keep me on track, otherwise I can head for the alfalfa pretty quickly. But I'm here today to talk a little bit about intimate partner violence and the connection to brain injury and how that happens and what does it look like. I'm here to talk about some specific areas of concern that have come up both by Shane and Ashley here mentioned a couple of those things. Strangulation is a big piece of that picture. Silencing is also a problem, stigma. I wanted to give you some resources that you can use, because I know you're going to head out into your communities and you're going to try and do some good and share some knowledge. And I want to make sure that you feel confident doing that, and that you feel like you're doing good in the work that you're doing. And then I'll introduce you to something that we call the Abuse and Brain Injury Toolkit, so that when I'm not in the room here to answer any questions, you can get those answers anyways, because we put them online for everybody. So just for a few quick minutes, I'd like to talk about Women at the Center, which is a phenomenal organization that I actually do not belong to. But my absolute gorgeous friend, Necka McGregor, who couldn't be here with you today because her son is getting married. Although he's getting married in Toronto, so I don't think her excuse is quite as good as Linda's. But he did have 2 weddings. So she was busy over the weekend doing that and just couldn't face the whole idea of travel after that. And I said, it's not a problem, Necka, I'll go out and do this talk. We have been research partners now for nearly a decade. She's an absolutely phenomenal human being. You really couldn't have picked a better organization, I have to say. They are the first incorporated survivor-led organization. They are survivor-led and driven from the ground up to the top. So everybody in the organization has been has experienced gender-based violence on some level, and they bring that passion and that commitment to the work that they do. They have over 6,000 members across the world at this point, and they're growing and expanding exponentially as we speak. They have very clear, simple mandate, mission, and values. They want to ensure that the voices of those with lived experience are key to the conversation. They see that voice as the voice that needs to be heard and listened to. They want to eradicate all forms of gender-based violence through social, personal, and political advocacy. And that value piece, that lived experience piece, is critical to the work that they do. They do this through a variety of different ways. So they engage in a lot of peer support, a lot of community capacity building, some collective healing processes. They have a strong research component, which has only grown stronger through the collaboration with us. But they're looking at community-based participatory research, and I have to say, as a professional researcher, I won't do any other kind anymore. And they're very committed to having survivor-led. So none of our collaborative projects go forward without the lived experience voice, right from the very beginning, telling us what is it that we need to know more about. Basically, I'm just a brain for hire, which is kind of interesting. They do a lot of education, a lot of awareness. Nneka would normally be here doing her own spiel, and I know that she wishes she could be. So each of us does a lot of this kind of work across the country. We do a lot of training, and we do some webinars as well. And again, that advocacy piece, and that's where you get your voice of lived experience. The person who tells the story best, and the person who can connect with the most in the room, are the people who've lived it. They have an astonishing membership across this country and around the world. I'm always amazed by what they get up to. And they have different kinds of memberships. So they can have a community member who's working within the community, connecting with other survivors and supporting that way. They have advocacy members, so for those folks who are fired up and want to do something about it, then they can. And they have chapter members. They're working on building new chapters out in this neck of the woods, but they haven't quite made it yet. So if folks are interested in that, please let me know, and I'll make sure to connect you with Nneka directly. So I'm here to talk about intimate partner violence and brain injury. And Shane brought up the numbers issue and how much of that is happening in a brain injury perspective. And the piece that I want to say about that is that this particular group of survivors dwarfs all others in terms of numbers. It's actually quite terrifying. So we've got 1 in 3 women in this country will experience intimate partner violence over their lifetime. That's in Canada. And we know that approximately 75% of those women, and that's an underestimate, will experience traumatic brain injury. You do the math on that, it's 1 in 8. The reason that's written on a t-shirt in pink is because that's the same statistic as breast cancer in this country. I want you to think about all the people that you know with breast cancer. Now think about the access to support that they have. Think about the research dollars that go into that. The knowledge base we have. If I was researching in breast cancer, I'd still be stuck at my desk reading for the next 20 years, just to start reading what we know about it. Think about the lack of stigma. What happens when a woman says, I've got breast cancer? Everybody runs to support. There's no shame attached to that label. And I've got the same number of survivors with brain injury because of exposure to intimate partner violence. And I don't have anywhere near those resources. So what you've committed to do here today, phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. Thank you. And I know I'm in off country, so let me get it to you in a language that makes sense. For every one single NHL player who will suffer a concussion on the ice in any given year, I've got 4,500 women. One concussion in hockey to 4,500 women. And again, let's look at the support that we are throwing at professional athletes. They are diagnosed, treated, and supported from the moment of impact. But nothing like that. Nothing like that for women survivors. Part of the challenge is that the area of violence most likely to be injured in a violent encounter are hits to the head, face, and neck. Over 92% of violent encounters are going to include that, including strangulation. The most likely type of injury to result from that kind of thing, aside from superficial damage, broken facial bones, that kind of thing, the most likely physical injury is an injury to the brain itself. And the big problem is the resultant damage. So the kind of damage that we would expect to see from that type of injury pattern is going to be centered in the frontal lobe. It's going to go after the executive functions. Those are the things that all of us use every day to organize, to plan. They're the things that we use when we communicate. Sometimes it's the things that we use to see emotion on somebody else's face. And those are the things that are being impaired. So women in these circumstances don't see it coming, and they can't plan to get out. I have a sneaking suspicion that this is part of the answer to the question of why don't they leave, which in and of itself is a problematic question, but it does become part of the discussion when we think about that. The problem is that we're leaving women in an ongoing cycle of violence, and frequently we're shaming and blaming them for it while we're at it as a society, and that's a problem that we need to do something about. We need to think about this as a healthcare issue, not a social issue. And we need to change the way that we approach it and support it. So I know that a lot of you have a lot of information about brain injury, and I'm not going to spend huge quantities of time unpacking that. I'd rather sort of introduce it a little bit and then contextualize it in a partner violence situation so that you understand both what brain injury looks like, but also how is that relevant to the women that you're looking to support moving forward. So the technical, and this is the last time I'll get any technical language here today, the technical definition is an alteration in brain function or other evidence of brain pathology caused by an external force. You can see at the bottom, we've got the acquired brain injury, the ABI guide. So that's all brain injuries that happen after birth. Everybody gets chucked into that initial category of an acquired brain injury. And then we have three different types. You've got a traumatic brain injury, which is caused by that external force piece. So somebody gets hit in the head, or there's a car accident, or they're being shaken. Concussions in sports, that's a big one these days. That conversation is happening. And then you get the very creatively named non-traumatic brain injury, which is the one that happens most often by medical things. So stroke or complications in surgery, cancer care, that kind of thing, that creates that non-traumatic brain injury. And then we've got the little guy on the end called a hypoxic ischemic, and I dare you to try and say that quickly 3 times. I can barely say it once. And that's the one caused by cutting off the oxygen supply or the blood supply to the brain. The reason I toss it into these talks is because strangulation is highly prevalent in these encounters. And believe it or not, you can cause a brain injury through strangulation with less force than it takes to open a pop can. So if you just think about bending that tab back on a pop can and how much force it takes you to do that, which is practically nothing, you can cause a brain injury through strangulation with less pressure and not leave any marks. So nobody believes it's even happened. We've got all these different classifications of brain injury. The thing to remember about these, we've got mild, moderate, and severe. And you can see that concussion is chucked into the mild category. The way that we sort of piece that out is by saying that all concussions are a form of mild brain injury, but not all mild brain injuries are concussions. These different classifications have everything to do with how you got the injury and nothing at all to do with the outcome. So somebody with a severe brain injury could have very minimal challenges moving forward. And someone with a mild injury can be catastrophically impacted for the rest of their lives. The classifications are determined by 2 or 3 very specific tests that are done very quickly post-injury. The thing that's important, one of the things that's important in this category to understand is that repeated exposure to brain trauma is exponential in nature in terms of outcome. So your first injury, maybe you see some stars, maybe you have a little bit of trouble with some headaches, you might have difficulty concentrating, and in a few weeks or a couple of months, it gets better and life moves on. You get another one on top of that, well, now maybe things are a little bit more complicated, and you've got some memory challenges mixed in, or you've got difficulty with temperature gauge on your body. You get really hot or really cold suddenly, and you start thinking, well, this is more difficult, and it lasts a lot longer, but still maybe it goes away. The problem is the next one. It's more like having 5 or 6 of those original ones, and the next one on top of that. We tell athletes, don't get hit in the head again for at least a couple of years. These women are back in a couple of hours or a couple of days. And they're layering years of exposure to these kinds of incidents on top of one another. So what does that look like in day-to-day life? There are 3 main groups of challenges that folks with brain injuries experience. The first one is the cognitive family. And it tends to show up in things like decision making and judgment. I gotta tell you, we are known for making crappy decisions. And we tend to leap into things a whole lot faster than we think. My husband would certainly attest to this. It's like living with this very strange teenager some days. But part of that has got to do with the reasoning and impulsive babies. The problem is that for folks who are experiencing violence, it can mean that they make what appears to be very erratic choices. So you might expect someone who's experiencing partner violence to behave in a logical way or a structured way, but they're not cognitively wired to do that anymore. And that starts to look like choices. And that's where the shame and blame comes in. Why don't they leave? Why do they stay? Why would they allow someone to do this to them? Well, the answers to that may be tied up in cognitive capacity. We wouldn't ask somebody using a chair to stand up. But that's what we're doing if we're asking folks who are cognitively impaired to reason and make decisions like that. We have to think about this from a health perspective. Difficulty with multitasking. I can tell you I'm literally incapable of chewing gum and walking at the same time. It's unbelievable, and I used to multitask. I ran a legal practice for 10 years, very successfully before my accident. I could multitask with the best of them, and I cannot do it anymore. And it's not just a matter of trying hard or thinking about it. Something happens. If I listen to somebody, I can no longer process information. Frequently when I talk to people, if I have to think about what I'm talking to you about, I will look out into the distance instead of looking at your eyes, because it confuses me. There's too much input, and I can't filter through. Now think about a woman sitting in a shelter who's being interviewed, or even worse, who has to talk to the police on their doorstep. And we expect her to filter out all that kind of information at the same time, and to provide information in a clear and logical fashion. Concentration. Memory. Memory is a big one, and memory is not just about recall, it's also about storage. So it never makes it in. I refer to it as being like Swiss cheese. So some bits make it into my memory and other things just don't. In the early years, I used to have folks come and say, well, don't you remember that conversation we had yesterday? And I'm like, did I see you yesterday? I don't remember that at all. So it's not even, you know that fuzzy feeling that you get when you think, oh, I think I know something about this. There's that vague memory feeling. It doesn't exist at all. When you frequently, in the court system, we hear that judges say, well, your story changes. You haven't said the same thing twice. You must be lying. I don't say you must be lying. I start asking what kind of physical violence did that person encounter? As soon as I know that there's been anything in terms of hits to the head, face, or neck, it's not about lying. They're telling the truth that they know at any given moment. So we talked a little bit about that inability to read facial expressions and why that's particularly important in this group. The communication challenges is a big piece too. And we'll talk, I've got a little bit more about that later, but it's sort of, when you have a brain injury, there are two types of us. One type doesn't know that we're different at all, and the other type is painfully aware of it all the time. And I fall into the second group. So I know quite well that I'm a little bit different. And I tend to stay away from folks because of that, because it just makes me uncomfortable to feel that way all the time. But there are lots of us who don't know that, who don't recognize that there's any change in their behavior whatsoever. And they're equally challenging in the sense that you can't tell them anything because they think that everything's working just the way it should be. The second group is the psychological challenges, and those are most commonly experienced with anxiety and depression. We have statistics of up over 60% of brain injury survivors are coping with anxiety and or depression at any given time. That's huge. That's more than double what we would expect to see in the general population. And it's really difficult to know, is it chemical or electrical in nature? So is it physiological in nature? Or is it a perfectly legitimate reaction to a really crap situation? Part of the challenge then becomes suicidality. We have high rates of suicide among survivors. And we tend to have a little bit of problem with anger management. I won't lie. We can lose our temper pretty fast. The key is knowing that that's what's happening and learning how to cope with that. We also have what's called emotional lability, which is a fancy way of saying it's basically like riding an emotional roller coaster all the time. So we can be happy and sad in the same breath, and we tend to have really big emotions. A lot of survivors will come and say things to me like, I don't really know what's wrong with me. I keep laughing when other people are crying. Or I do the wrong thing in the wrong time, and all of a sudden I'm so angry I don't know what to do. And I can't figure it out because I was never angry before. And all of those things make perfect sense to me when they talk about it, but they don't understand that that's what's happening for them. The changes to the personality is very interesting. Who would have thought that your brain controls your personality? I would never have believed this until I actually lived it and went from being a type A extrovert, running her company and owning the world at the age of 32, to being afraid to be in a room full of people. I can't tell you how many years it's taken me to even be able to stand here and do what I'm doing right now. Sheer stubborn will is what has kept me and taught me to do this. That and a lack of just a willingness to not care about how it all turns out, kind of, no embarrassment. But it takes a long time to get there. What we hear from survivors is, I just don't feel like me anymore. I don't recognize myself. One of the things that I always said, it's very interesting, I have an older brother, he's 3 years older than I am. And somewhere in the middle of my master's degree when I was looking at this, I wanted to understand what it was like for family members. And I did a lot of reading and discovered that in many ways it's much more difficult for the family members than it is for the survivors. Because we're busy getting on with figuring out how to live like this. So we're just putting one foot in front of the other and we're getting it done day by day. But for the family members, they get to see the person that they loved physically in front of them, but the person that they were is gone. I died in that car accident 20 years ago. There's no doubt about that to me or to the folks who are close to me. But for me, it wasn't, I had to grieve that loss, but I could still move forward. For my family, it was much more difficult, except for my brother, who says he prefers this version. I'm not kidding, he really does. And for quite a while after the accident, I sort of swore to him as he pushed the buttons to see what would happen, see how quickly he could get me to startle and things like that. He's a loving guy, and I love him to pieces, but some days you gotta wonder. Yeah, particularly the older ones, right? When you're the baby and the upstart, they get a little, yeah, I know. So then we've got the physical challenges. And these are the ones that they certainly hold true no matter how you get your injury. And that's one of the things. I'm a brain injury researcher. I just ended up doing IPV research along with it. And what I can tell you is it doesn't matter how you get your brain injury, they look the same. So all of the information that we have in the brain injury world can be transferred across to the IPV context. It just has to be sensitized and trauma informed. But the big one here is the headaches. Almost everybody that I come across regularly talks about headaches. It's a big marker. And it's one of the things that doesn't go with PTSD. So one of the challenges that we have in this field is prying apart what is PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and what is brain injury, and how do they look different, and how do they look the same, and what do we do differently for each of them. Headaches is one of the things that doesn't tend to show up in PTSD. The ringing in the ears equally doesn't show up. I haven't heard silence in 20 years. I don't know what it sounds like anymore. The closest that I get to silence is when I take a walk in the forest in the fall and there's a little bit of wind and it makes just enough noise in the leaves that it drowns out the ringing in my ears, but not enough that it feels like noise in and of itself. And that's the closest I've ever come to silence in 20 years. For a lot of folks, it's such a loud noise that they can't think at all beyond that. Chronic fatigue is, let me tell you, that's an interesting one. I've been with my husband for 15 years. Interestingly, we met and married post-injury for me, so he never knew the previous version, which is kind of interesting. It was an interesting dynamic for me. But he never really understood what I meant when I said I'm tired. And he would just kind of keep pushing or keep sort of, he'd bring in the whole subject back up from a different direction. Well, if we just approach it differently, then she'll be good. And then about 3 years ago, we got a concussion. Yeah, that changed everything. And now he understands what it means. The chronic fatigue, you can't push through that. You can't, it shuts you down. And that's what it is. It's your body shutting you down. When I studied for my master's degree, I used to take an hour to read something. I'd take about twice as long as my colleagues did to read things. And for about every 45 minutes, I'd have a 15-minute nap. And it's not that I thought to myself, I'm gonna nap. It's that I literally fell asleep. So I started reading on the couch all the time because it was just easier than falling off a chair. But your brain just shuts you down and it says we're done. And it would process the information while I was having a nap. And I would wake up and get most of it into my brain, or at least parts of it, and move forward. But it's like it's a brick wall. There's no going around it or over it. You just wait it out. The nausea, vomiting, and dizziness and blurred vision, those are all tied to each other. They have to do with where the damage is and what kind of damage you're dealing with. And again, those don't tend to show up on post-traumatic stress disorder, so they're also another marker that I would look for if I was trying to distinguish between them. The hormone and endocrine system involvement is interesting, and this is one that we know very little about. A lot of women have different periods after a brain injury. And there's some really interesting science that says that where you are in your menstrual cycle when you are injured can be either protective or in fact increase the risk of complication. So it's how all of that works, I don't even begin to know. I'm not a scientist in that sense, I'm a social worker. But it's particularly important for this group, and it's the kind of thing that I hear from a lot of survivors, well, why didn't somebody tell me that? Here I thought A, B, and C. The number of times that people say, if only I had known about any of these symptoms, it would make a huge difference. So here's where I get really, really positive. This is my most depressing slide. I'm sorry about that. So this is what the consequences of a brain injury are. This is what you can expect. Increased rates of mental illness, higher amounts of unemployment and homelessness. We have over 50% of homeless populations have brain injuries. And the real kicker is that they got the brain injury before they got homeless. So homelessness is often an impact of being brain injured. I can tell you, if it wasn't for the fact that I have a family that had assets and resources and believed in sharing them, I would have lost my home in the first 4 months post-injury. There wouldn't have been anything I could have done to stop it. The unemployment rates are very high, and there are a variety of reasons for that. Partially, we're unpredictable. I can have really good days and I can have really bad days. And believe me, my really bad days are impressive. There's no way I could be up here. I would be sitting in a quiet, dark room, crying uncontrollably or exhausted or so wired I would vibrate. And you couldn't touch me, you couldn't come close to me. Very quickly after my accident, my mother learned to not hug me under those circumstances. And she would physically step in front of anybody who was reaching out to touch me because they could see I was visibly upset and they would want to comfort me. And my mother would dive in and say, "Don't touch her." Because she would know that if we could just keep me together for another 2 or 3 minutes, I would get enough strength and enough serenity back to keep myself together in one piece. But if somebody touched me, gone. A total mess on the floor in 5 minutes. So she would stop that from happening. That's difficult if I want a job. That unpredictability is really hard. I don't think in linear patterns, and I don't talk in linear patterns, and I tell my students that on the first day of class. It took me years to learn how to tell them that I would be, how they could deal with me in that way. And to tell them to wait. We have 12 weeks in a class. Wait it out to the end of the 12. I promise I'll come back to the beginning of the circle. It just takes me that long to get there. Again, it's difficult to do that if what you want is a job. The fact that I tend to work, I have what I refer to as about 4 hours of brain space a day. So my brain functions cognitively for about 4 hours a day. But it takes me twice as long to do most things as it does other people. And if I don't eat right, or I don't sleep right, or there's just too much stuff going on in my world, then you can shorten those hours dramatically at any given time. One of the things that we talk about in brain injury is the spoon theory. And we talk about how everybody has a number of spoons worth of energy in a day. So let's say you have 12 spoons worth of energy in your drawer. What does it take you, how many spoons does it cost you to do any one given thing? For most people, they end their days still with spoons in the drawer. For everything you do, you take out a spoon or 2 or 3 or however many it is, but you usually end up with 1 or 2 left in the end of the day that you carry forward to another day. I barely make it to lunchtime and still have spoons in the drawer on a given day. Again, it makes it tricky to work. I will never have a full-time job. Not gonna happen. And last time I checked, they don't hire part-time academics. So I don't expect to graduate with my PhD and get a job in faculty. Not happy about it, but I've come to that piece of understanding, and that's the way it is, and so I do other things instead. But that's the reality for a lot of folks like me. And I'm not dodging punches every day. So if it's this difficult for me, and believe me, I come from every piece of privileged background there is to have. I had education, I had money, I had brains, I had a lot of good people in my life. I had a loving, supportive family, even my brother. And I clawed my way back out, inch by inch. The person that you see here took 20 years to grow into the skin. I cannot imagine how women do this when they're being told they're stupid, when they're being hit, when their lives are threatened, when their children are threatened, when their pets are threatened. I honestly don't see how they make it out, which is why this is the only work I will do now. We have higher rates of divorce than the average population, particularly if you're women. No offense to the men in the room. It's not universal, but Men seem to leave brain-injured wives more often than wives seem to leave brain-injured men. Statistically, it seems to be the way it happens. Higher rates of substance use challenges, which is a major problem and totally understandable. If your life is crappy, it's not a huge stretch to reach for substance to make it seem a little bit better. They're more likely to experience poverty, higher rates of social isolation. It's like I said, you don't go into a room if you feel different all the time. And the potential challenges to credibility and capability based on being disabled or brain damage. There's still a lot of stigma out there on that subject alone. Oh, this says the battery's running low. That's gonna be exciting. Hold on a second while I solve this problem. It's all good. We go with what we have. So I said I'd talk a little bit more about communication. This to me is one of the really key things, and I think it's going to be important to what you're doing, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time on it. What we notice in the front line is that frontline workers get really annoyed with their clients. And this is in the IPD context, and they say to me, so I've got this client who never remembers her appointments, and she can't be bothered to do her homework, and she never fills out her forms, and she's constantly pissed off. And my first question is, did she get hit often? Because that just sounds to me like somebody with a brain injury. And the minute you tell them that, their whole body language changes. And then you get social workers who care. And then they see that there's a reason for this and something to be done. And this is the piece of the message. If people see those behaviors as choices, then it makes them angry. And that's understandable. It seems like disrespect, or it seems like they can't be bothered to be engaged in their own care. That's understandable to take that personally. But if you understand that it's a health condition, it's something that has happened to them through no fault of their own, that changes how you interact with them. I think this is one of the biggest messages that you can take out into your communities. You don't need to be a scientist. You don't need to diagnose. You need to understand that the intersection exists. The likelihood, just assume that every woman who's experienced physical forms of intimate partner violence is brain injured. Because honestly, we've got literature that says it's up as high as 100%. It's just that the science is a little wonky on that, so we stop at 75. I tell Frontline, just assume every woman walking in your door is brain injured. You can't damage people through the kinds of support that we're telling you to do for brain injury here. So just offer it to everybody. I think we covered all this. We'll skip this slide. Yeah. One of the things that's it's difficult. I tell my students it isn't easy being green. Does anybody else remember Kermit the Frog? Yeah, awesome. See, usually I'm talking to a bunch of 20-year-olds and they're like, huh? This is a great crowd. Thanks, guys. So it's not easy being green. When you know you're green, it's uncomfortable. It puts you on an edge. And so you shy away from those encounters. You stand back. One of the other things that's challenging for a lot of folks with brain injury is that stimulus, both visual and sound stimuli, are really, really hard to filter out. So grocery stores, biggest nightmare ever. Nobody with a brain injury should have to go grocery shopping. And it certainly should never be used as rehab. Let me tell you. Thank goodness for COVID. It's the one good thing to come out of COVID is grocery delivery is everywhere. Fantastic. But it also happens in social situations. I can no longer stand in a room full of people and have everybody talking and be able to monitor individual conversations. I used to be able to do that easily, and I can't do that anymore. Everything comes, it's like a wave of sound, and it just comes at you, and it hits you full on, and it comes from everywhere. One of the things that I tell frontline workers is put your client with their back to the wall. So at least they've only got sound coming at them from one direction. That's what I used to do. That's how I learned to go back to parties. I'm the person who sits in a chair in the corner. Partially because I don't want to talk to people too often. It's not good for a social worker. But partially because then the sound is only coming at me from one direction. And I learned how to deal with that. I learned how to let the sound go over top of it and not have that set me off and set off the alarm bells. If you think about, we get easily overwhelmed. It's like somebody trying to follow a conversation in a language they don't quite know. I can attest to this, trying to learn German because my husband is from Germany. At some point in the conversation, I'm like, oh, damn it, I can't do it anymore. And I just give up. And then the sound goes over top of me. And it's like that for them all the time in their own language. This is this piece about PTSD, overlapping brain injury. And for the women that I look at, I think it is particularly important. I think the reason, and let me just say that none of us in brain injury knew anything about this up until about 6-7 years ago. This is brand new. You are all now on the cutting edge of science and care. There are about 6 researchers, maybe, in this country doing this work. There are another half a dozen in the US. We're it. I get on the plane a lot, just because there are many of us. We have 5 new PhD students working with Paul and Karen in BC. It's fantastic. There are 5 of them who want to do this. I can retire. Awesome. But part of what's happened is it got hidden as mental health. It got hidden as PTSD because it looks a lot like it. The piece about a brain injury, we don't tend to have flashbacks. That's a trauma response. And unless we got the brain injury in a particularly psychologically traumatic event, you're not likely to be getting flashbacks and nightmares. That talks to me a lot more like PTSD. And I used to say in the beginning, it didn't matter. We didn't need to tear them apart. We just put them together and we don't care. And I don't say that anymore. And that's all my brain injury guys telling me, for heaven's sakes, there's so much we can do about brain injury. We stop telling people that we don't need to know. These guys are doing great work. There's so much they can do for folks 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years post-injury. It doesn't matter how long ago the injury was. That's what makes the work that you're going to do so important. These are not lost causes. They're just hidden right now. And we just need to get the word out there through the kinds of things that you're going to be doing in your campaign. Substance use and addictions is, again, it's really high. It's 80%, along with brain injury. And that's a chicken or an egg, because the substances also cause brain injury, so we're never quite sure which way that's going around. And then the piece around the strangulation, which is so important. Some of the data that we've got suggests that over 60% of women survivors of intimate partner violence experienced strangulation at some point during the violence. It's very common, and it's very underreported. If you think about intimate partner violence being a tip of an iceberg in terms of reporting at all, then double and triple it in terms of strangulation. And part of the problem is that it can happen with no visible marks. So nobody's asking. So these women are going into hospital situations or into care situations, and nobody's asking them, did they experience that? I've got women who have told me stories of going into an ER department after they've had a tire iron taken to their heads. And nobody has said the word concussion. So you can imagine how much of this is getting missed. I'm sorry, I did warn you I'm not uplifting. The positive part is that you can make a difference and you're going to make a difference. When I started this work 10 years ago, I struggled to put 15 people in a room together to come and hear about it. We had to pay their way to come and talk to us about what was happening. And now These kinds of things happen all the time. In terms of, I come to a room full of people, and I don't have to pay you. We're getting there, we're making a difference collectively. And it's tapping into the grassroots like this. It's getting folks like you who care and who want to do something about it. This is what you can do. The screening piece is important. I used to be the first one to say we have to screen everybody, we have to know we need a diagnosis. And I'm not anymore. And it's a complicated piece. It's something that those of us in the research world in this are taking our time with, and we're doing that on purpose. Because this group is very high risk. Being labeled with a brain injury comes with some added bonus joys. You tell this to a judge, and they're gonna start wondering about your capacity to be a parent. So now you're gonna lose your kids because your partner hit you often enough that you're brain injured? And this is happening. We've got court cases where abusive partners are winning because they're arguing that their ex is no longer capable from an injury that they inflicted in the first place. Like, the logic behind that just sends me to the moon. So we need to be careful. The partner themselves, my own experience of an abusive partner came after my injury. He was able to manipulate me like nobody's business. He just looked me dead in the eye and said, well, we talked about that yesterday. You told me I could have that $100 from your wallet. You said it was fine if I did this, that, or the other. Of course you said you didn't need to be there, that we could stay home, and that you didn't need to talk to your family. And I believed him. For 3 years. Until nobody else was telling me that anymore. Until he was the only one telling me that there were entire conversations that I didn't remember. And that's when I started to understand what was happening. That's the double-edged sword here, is that brain injury also puts women at much higher risk of abusive relationships. So if we have increased risk for these women off a diagnosis, surely there's some reason that we still want to do this. And it usually comes down to support and services. The sad truth is, we don't have them yet. Most of the brain injury support organizations across this country have no idea how to operate in a trauma-informed approach. They're trying, and they're learning, and they're coming to the table and talking with us as much as anybody is right now. And we're on the verge of developing new services for them so that we can help with that problem. But the reality is, services for this particular group are limited. And the challenge is that a lot of what we have to offer is just going to re-traumatize. So until we can address that, it's a tricky situation. And if we can't offer services and we're increasing their risk, then we really need to look at the ethics of screening. Is this the right thing to do? What I tell folks is that it doesn't matter if you screen or not. What you need to know is, what are those common signs and symptoms, and how do I address them? I don't need you to have a diagnosis for somebody. Most of your brain injury organizations across this country don't need a diagnosis in order to offer service and support. They'll offer it to anybody who walks in the door and says, I'm brain injured. And they're your best bet in terms of services. It's true, formal disability support services are going to be tied to a diagnosis. That's the way it is, and until we can change that, that's always going to be a barrier. What you want to be able to do is recognize, you want to be able to recognize the wheelchair. Remember when I said we wouldn't ask someone to stand up if they were using a chair for mobility? We need to stop asking these women to stand up. We just need to understand those challenges. We need to expect their memory to be a little funny. We need to expect their recall to be different, for the story to come out differently each time. We need to expect them to have trouble remembering when their appointments are, and to do their homework and their paperwork and whatever else has to be done. We need to figure out how to support them in parenting rather than judging when they don't get the kids to school on time. Those bags that you're going to put together with all the little things in them that are going to help them do that, that's what's going to make the difference. You're going to make it possible for someone to organize her thoughts. Those sticky notes that you put in there, that's what they're using to write down their escape plans. That's what we're hearing from women. I write myself sticky notes and I put them in the car so that I know where they are. Those save women's lives. And that's what you're going to be doing in the next few months. For those of you that want some resources, there's some great stuff, and I know it's a provincial thing and I apologize to everybody, but the Ontario Neurotrauma Foundation put out some concussion guidelines for kids and athletes and stuff. They're fantastic. They're really, really good in terms of being easy to read. They have lots of good information, and a brain injury is a brain injury. So a lot of what's in there is perfectly reasonable for you to use. This is my unabashed self-plug. I'm a social worker, so when I started doing this 10 years ago, I would go into a room like this and I'd say, you know what, if you want to hear from me in the future, give me your business card. I'm also old school, I don't like computers. So I literally just collected business cards and people's addresses and whatever else. And when I hit about 300 of them, all the folks, all the young guys in the lab said to me, well, for heaven's sakes, Lynn, you need a database. I'm like, what is that when it's at home? And what am I supposed to do with it? So I gave them all of my business cards, and they created what they refer to as a database. And now we have, and then we gave it this really cute little name because the government thought it was a really interesting concept. Doesn't anybody talk to anybody anymore? I don't understand. Why does the government think that collecting people's names and addresses and communicating with them is a big deal? It's really weird. But anyways, so we called it the Knowledge to Practice Network because it needed a funky name. And now we've shortened that to the K2P network so I can look all hip and cool. And basically I'm just a walking Rolodex, folks. That's really what happens is somebody will say to me, you know what, we're doing this out here and it would be really neat if we had somebody out there who can do that. And I'm like, oh yeah, I know who you need. You need this person and that's where to get them. It's how Glenda got to me. She's just in my Rolodex. So if you would like to join our K2P network, please just send me your email or just write down on a piece of paper before I leave today. If you have a business card, I'll take that too. Whatever works. And we tend to send out information when we have something that's interesting and new to send out. We send it out through the network. Or we often will reach out through the network if we're looking for research ideas or participants or that kind of thing. So that's what it's all about. And it's coast to coast. We have, I think, about 500 people now, from one end of this country to the other, top and bottom, so it's kind of cool. And then we built this really cool little item, and this is where I get really proud of myself, because I love this thing. You can get it at abitoolkit.ca, and because I am one human being who can't fly across this country all the time, answering everybody's questions all the time, and we need to know everywhere, everything, yesterday, we built an educational website. And all the information that you might want to get about the intersection of intimate partner violence and brain injury is there. Plus some tips and tools and tricks. We're just in the, please let it be the final stages of building the 2.0 version of this. And I have some really cool little infographics. I think actually I have pictures of them. That's the landing page, so that's basically what you see when you get there. Infographics. Because apparently these are the latest thing. I don't know. What do I know? I'm a researcher. But I have people who work with us who tell me that this is the best thing ever. So that's what we're doing. So we made basic ones on the intersection itself and hired a very fancy Toronto design firm to do. This one's important because of those red flag symptoms on the left-hand side. People can actually die from brain injury if you receive more than one of them too quickly. They can actually kill you. We refer to that as second impact syndrome. It doesn't happen every day, but it can happen, and it does happen, and people need to know what those red flag symptoms are. We've got one for mental health because of that overlap that we're talking about. And what we say is, I always say Merry Christmas because I was here when they built that. But use it, share it, whatever works best. We have folks in the front line who sit down with their clients and go through it with them, not because they're trying to diagnose, but because they want to offer somebody just the chance to say, does that look like you? Does this feel familiar to you? We have first person accounts on there, so women sharing their own stories of what that's been like for them and how they've experienced it. We have some little videos coming on some of these hot topics so that folks can sit down and watch a video together if they find communication is difficult, that kind of thing. And this is the best kept secret ever. So I'm extraordinarily proud to say that we have recently been given a very substantial research grant from the federal government to take 3 years to investigate building support services for women survivors of intimate partner violence and brain injury. I finally landed the whale, folks. We will take 3 existing programs across North America, and I need to talk to you about what you're up to, because you need to be in on this. 3 existing programs, one out of the Cridge Center for the Family in British Columbia, a nominal organization that has spent the last 50 years offering services to both women survivors of intimate partner violence and folks who've been surviving brain injury, and they didn't know there was a crossover until they came and talked to us about 6 years ago. They now have an intimate partner violence brain injury program that they have developed in-house that cross-pollinates in between each other in terms of training their staff and supporting survivors. And they're feeding in from both of their referral lines. It's phenomenal, folks. What they're up to in BC is amazing. So we're taking that program and we're just tarting it up a little bit. What is it they call Pimp My Ride? It's the same thing. That's what we're doing here. We've got a little bit from the Brain Injury Services of Toronto, and a little bit from a really cool organization in the United States called the Barrow Institute in Arizona that's also been offering, those 2 organizations are both brain injury services, and they've been targeting women survivors of partner violence and offering direct service into the community that way. So we're going to take those 3 programs, stick them together, create something that has all the best components of each, and we're going to build a blueprint and send that out. We're going to test it over a period of 15 months, tweak it, test it again, and then send it out through the toolkit for everybody to use, free of charge. That toolkit is really accessible. Thank you, feds, because this, give me 3 years and we'll change how we do this. And this is my absolute heartfelt thank you. You don't know, you can't know how difficult their lives are and how much this can matter. If you take these messages into your community, I promise you, you will make a difference. And you can do so much more than I can. So much more. There are so many more of you. Thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you from Women at the Center and from all the women that you will be helping, and that we will work with you to amplify that around the world. I promise. Thank you very much.
Anybody have any doubt as to the cause, the purpose, our inclusion in it, our participation in it, and how important even we are as volunteers to understanding and caring about the intersection of brain injury and interpersonal violence. Thank you very much for sharing. I'm sure there are some people in the room who fully understand how difficult this may have been for you. And all we can say to you is from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for the strength to share. This day became possible due to a connection between the Saskatchewan Royal Purple and the Saskatchewan Brain Injury Association. And that grew into what we've experienced today. Lynn said that she played a part in applying for the grant from Women and Gender Equality Canada. I know that Glenda played a big role in it. I know that Marvine Lane, on behalf of our organization, played a role in getting the grant from Women and Gender Equality Canada. And that part of that grant is paid for the expenses for today. So thank you very much to anybody and everybody that had a role in getting the grant. It's a $75,000 grant to do education with regard to the intersection of interpersonal violence and brain injury in our western provinces. So thank you to Women in Gender Equality. I'm going to get you to have the opportunity to say thank you on behalf of Saskatchewan Brain Injury and your connection to the volunteer world. Tracy Burnett is Glenda's right hand, left foot, right foot, whatever help that she needs. We know when we boost to get new members in a city or a town in Canada, that a good 50% of the people who are responding now to the Canadian Royal Purple, who are boosting for members, saying we want help to help brain injury survivors, we know that full 50% of those people are in fact survivors of brain injury in some capacity. We know that we have members within our organization that have brain injuries. They've become very, very special to us, and Tracy can help explain that special meaning.
I just want to say thank you to Lynn for sharing her story today. I really appreciate it. I know a lot of our members, they can't articulate and share what they're feeling or their sense of lack of community or isolation. So to be able to have somebody actually share what they're thinking and feeling is incredibly powerful. So thank you for being so vulnerable to share that. I am with Saskatchewan Brain Injury. It's been 9 years. We have a mission for helping improving the lives of brain injury survivors and their family members. We offer support, we offer lots of socializing. A lot of our members, one of the biggest things is that they're very isolated. When you get a brain injury, you typically lose all of your community. Your friends go away, family goes away, and you're just left with you and your loved ones. And so to have social groups, coffee groups, walking groups. It is just imperative. If you talk to one of our survivors, they would say that means everything to them. So we cannot do any of that if we aren't able to fundraise, and thanks to people like Saskatchewan Royal Purple and our Brain Love Partnership, we are able to help provide those things with our members. So first off, I'd like to thank Sandy and Saskatchewan Royal Purple for everything you guys do. Is our Brain Love women in the room? I would just love for you guys to stand up because we are so grateful for you. Who's in the room? Just a round of applause for our Brain Love women. Thank you so much. And just this Purple Thursday, you women are incredible. The power, the impact you have in the world with brain injury survivors and other women, you are inspiring people to change and to help others. So just on behalf of Saskatchewan Brain Injury, we would just like to say thank you so much. Thank you. And thanks to Sandy.
And now we can have some fun. No, we're not going to do another nudie auction, although I bet we could do better. 399, 400. We have some special check presentations. We will start off with the members from Ontario to come and present your check to Lynn. Then if you want to go on the other side, and members from Ontario come and present your check. Each province will come one by one as your province is presenting. Please, people from that province, stand up. So the gals, come around in front, Nick. So the gals from Ontario. President.
Where's my hometown?
Lynn has already told us we can contact her for about a lodge in Kitchener. How about that, eh?
On behalf of the lodges in Ontario, we present this and we look forward to further action that can be done. Thank you.
Manitoba.
I'm gonna be messy by the time you're done now.
You're okay with this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
On behalf of the Manitoba Association, we'd like to present you with this check and thank you very much for all your information, all your hard work, and for myself, thank you.
And you want to turn this over? These checks are all made to women at the center. Represent our donation for saying thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Saskatchewan.
That's from all of our lodges across Saskatchewan.
Thank you.
Alberta. All gals from Alberta.
Wow, the crowd. Oh, it's you. Oh, good to see you. Like Santa.
On behalf of Alberta, the province of Alberta, Royal Purple, we would like to present you with these checks.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
British Columbia.
Wow, look at all of you. Wow.
On behalf of all of the members of BC, thank you for
Thank you.
And now Lynn from, can I come up this way? Come this way? from all the members across Canada, we topped her all up, totaled her all up, $5,000 to the women at the center.
Unmasked. I'll get risky. Thank you.
And this would be your top-up check.
Thank you very much.
And you asked the Saskatchewan Brain Injury Association, this check's going to get bigger, isn't it?
They're awesome. Thank you. I can't even, I don't know what to say. I'm going to get on NECA's case for sending me out here to get all week. It's, what you've done is amazing. I don't know what to say, except thank you so much on behalf of everyone. We'll do good things, I promise.
It is from the past honored Royal Purple,
Past national president.
past national presidents.
Thank you.
So now it's 5,000.
And a little extra. They want the two gray-haired ladies
Yeah,
together.
right.
We earned it.
Yeah, we did. Great, here we go.
Yep. Thank you.
Now we have an opportunity for questions and answers. I know we have some professionals within our group. Even if you're not a professional, if you've got a question that you want answered from any one of the folks up here with regard to what you've heard or what we can do, please ask it, or make a comment if you want. It's sharing time. It's question and answer and sharing time. Yeah, we'll give you a mic in order to be able to share.
Somebody has a question for me, but
Hi, my question's actually for the Alberta group. Is there any plans for a coalition between all the groups in Alberta?
I can speak to that a little bit. I'll try to speak to it a little bit. I'm a little less nervous than I was earlier. As you can tell, I can hold the microphone with one hand now. I spoke to the ABI network, the Alberta Brain Injury Initiative Network, earlier, and that is, in a sense, a coalition across the province to help support all Albertans dealing with brain injuries and their effects. It has now become, somewhat unofficially, but somewhat officially as well, an official program. So it's designated within the Alberta government as a program, and the sort of excitement around that designation is that we may see more attention paid to brain injury as a provincial issue. A lot of our funding comes from the Alberta government, so that Alberta Brain Injury Initiative now becoming a program is a positive sign, I think. But yes, there are several regions throughout the province that connect monthly and more frequently when there are special projects to talk about their experience with supporting brain injury survivors. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Cash.
I'm just going to add one more group to that. It's called the Alberta Neuro Network. It's not specific to brain injury. It's actually a coalition of different organizations that support individuals impacted by neurological conditions. So it includes Parkinson's Association, MS Society, a number of the different brain injury groups, spinal cord injury. And partly that was developed because together our impact is bigger, together our numbers are bigger. So when we're bringing an advocacy issue to government, we can have all those other groups backing that particular project. So that's kind of another advocacy piece when you're thinking about kind of a coalition or communicating with government.
Thanks.
Don't be shy.
Any more questions? Can I bring the mic over to someone?
You know, I'm Jean Stinson, and I'm from the president of the Central Alberta Brain Injury Society. I've never seen such a great group of people with that have something to do with brain injury. I feel quite isolated sometimes. I've been doing it for 20 years, and I feel so hopeful that I can reach out to all of you. I kind of get my information from Saskatchewan and Sabus, and I just hope to get lots more. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Judy.
I just want to say that I've learned so much today. I'm so impressed with everything. It's fantastic what you guys do. I hope to become part of it.
Okay, Lynn, I have a question for you. I know that you had briefly talked about first responders and stuff like that. Is there going to be like a care bag idea going on with that in regards to it? Like what we're doing for the shelters?
Yeah, this is part of what's sort of really interesting to me about what you're up to. You guys figured this out ahead of the curve. And it's amazing. Part of what the Barrow Institute is doing in Arizona that we've worked to collaborate with them on is exactly this. A big piece of what they've been doing reaching out to their community is these kinds of care bags. They call them, I think they actually call them the brain love something or other. Like I think it's really similar to what you're doing. And they've been doing this for a decade very successfully and putting things in their packages like sticky notes, like good quality stationery. They've been putting in day planners. And part of what they've chosen to do is spend the money on good quality because they wanted women to feel that they were being valued. And the idea was that they were addressing some of those cognitive challenges. So they wanted really practical, how do we meet the needs of women who are trying to get a job? How do we meet the needs of women who are trying to plan and lead? So they were going for those really practical memory and planning challenges. Yeah, that's exactly part of our fancy new grant is to make is to include these bags, which is just amazing that I then have you guys coming to us and talking about this is what we're going to do for Purple Thursday. Did I die? I died. But that's okay. I'm laughing. So I thought it was really impressive that you had thought of this game. I thought it was really impressive that you guys had thought this one up already and we're already moving forward. Part of what we've got to in terms of putting in the information packages, we worked with Glenda to help develop those little flyers for you. And I think that one of the things that is really important, we didn't put the toolkit on those flyers. We left that off. That was a choice that we made. And my research team said, wait a minute, we're not on there. And I said, relax guys, we don't have to be on there. We need folks to stay safe. And we know that these packages will go out in a sort of a generic form through your organizations and your communities, and we wanted women to be safe with that. So we just made them about brain injury, we didn't make them about intimate partner violence, and that's what that choice was made for. And we honor that, and we would encourage you to continue that approach so that you got it and that you're on top of that, because that's part of that risk piece in terms of identification. And I'm so happy to hear that you're already on it. I don't need to tell you anything about what to do. Because you guys are already doing it. It's fantastic.
Glenda makes a good boss.
In terms of the first responders specifically, they're so high on my list, I can't tell you. But what we identified about 8 years ago in our first project was that everybody needed to know and everybody needed training. And we're one small team and we rely on government grants just as much as everybody else does, and we have to jump through those hoops just as much as everybody else does. So we had to choose and we had to prioritize, and we prioritized frontline because we thought, where do the women go? It doesn't mean that the folks in first response are not important to us. We do a lot of outreach and education with them. I now have police forces in Ontario who've changed their practices around asking questions when they're on the doorstep. They no longer look at a woman whose speech is slurred and who's a little unsteady on her feet and whose memory is wrong. They no longer look at her and think drugs and alcohol. They're now asking if she's bounced her head off a wall. So we are making a difference in that area, but that's a little slower, and it's because we made a very calculated choice that was driven by survivors. We did what they told us they wanted us to do. I promise I don't bite.
Can I ask a personal question?
Yes.
Is that when you said you were a lawyer, so when you had your injury, what made you make the choice to move to what you do today? Was there some assistance or someone stood out? Because I know you said you've forgotten a lot of things. Was there something that stood out so amazing is why you made the choice that you are working with today?
Actually, it was just the opposite. 20 years ago, we knew nothing about brain injury the same way that we do now. They had good services coming out of Australia. The really sort of cutting edge research seems to have been driven out of Australia, and some in the UK, and some pretty good stuff coming out of the States. But I have to say Canada was behind the curve on that one. And BC, for those of you from BC in the room, good on you guys, you delivered first. The wave for brain injury knowledge and service in this country has driven through BC out to the east. And really, there was nothing. I woke up a stranger to myself the next day and had no idea who was living in my skin. I couldn't predict what I would do or how I would do it. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't do my job, which was, I always say to folks with brain injury, it always goes after the thing you care about the most. And that was who I was. That was my identity. Everything was built around my career. And I can tell you, don't do that. It's not a good plan. Nobody ever lay on their deathbed and wish they'd worked more. So I don't mind that has changed. The things that I care about now, the things that move me are different, and I'm okay with that. But there was no support. I never met anybody with a brain injury until at least 5 years post-injury. I went to our local brain injury association and they kind of offered me pottery classes, which is great for a lot of folks, but that's not who I was and it's not what I needed. Peer support for someone like me didn't exist. I didn't have access to rehab care. I was 18 months post-injury before I was even diagnosed properly. And a lot of the medical community now says that chances are a lot of what is permanent damage for me is that way because of those 18 months. Because of the exposure to the stress and the strain of not knowing what was happening and not having adequate support probably did a lot of the damage and enforced it that way. So for me, it was about making sure that the next batch didn't have the same experience. And when I practice as a registered social worker, I work pretty much only with folks dealing with acquired injury or acquired illness and helping them adjust and navigate, working through that grief and loss, looking at themselves from a new light, trying very hard to see themselves as having gifts and bonuses in their life. I have a friend who's very happy that things happened to her the way they did. I haven't got quite that point yet in 20 years, but I can say that I have been more than fairly compensated. There are so many good things in my life that I would not have without this injury that, I don't recommend the process, I gotta say. To not chase trucks on a highway to see if you too can get a brain injury, it's not worth it. But if you're gonna get brain injured, it's a pretty good outcome. And that's possible for a lot of folks. And I think that's a key piece of the message, is that I share my story not to tell folks how it happens and how it works, but to give folks hope that life after brain injury can be better. It just takes some time, and it takes some accommodating and some support and a lot of hard work, but you can get there.
Yep. Okay.
So historically, they have said in the last, I believe it's 9 years, there's been so much massive difference of the understanding of how the brain even works. Like they literally have thrown textbooks out that they taught medical students. Like literally, and they laugh at them now because the whole way they have worked with it now is so different. So I'm asking you now is that, are our older professional people taking on the new information? I see she's laughing already. Are they taking on the new information and actually using it, or are they just allowing it to skid on over until they retire and somebody young comes in and uses it?
Are there any medical professionals in your You know what? It's a yes and no is the honest truth. I met a woman a few weeks ago whose story broke my heart. Honestly, she'd have been better off if she'd never met a single one of her medical professionals that she came across. They gave her what I refer to as the mushroom treatment, which is go sit in a dark room and wait for things to get better. Do not exercise, do not go out in public, do not look at screens, basically do not do anything. We have debunked that so thoroughly, and yet this is still the care that she was given in Toronto. For heaven's sakes, we have the best science in this country in some ways. You got it in BC, we've got it in Toronto. That she would still be given that medical advice is just beyond frustrating to me. Her level of difficulty now, 4 years post-injury, is not good, and the reality is it won't be great moving forward for her without a lot of hard work, because now some things are firmly entrenched. It's not that the medical profession doesn't care. They are overworked, underpaid, and undervalued to an extent that I can't believe, and that was before COVID. You want them to do anything extra now? I don't see how we can. Until we get proper supports in place, until we value the jobs that they do, honest to goodness, in Ontario, we have locked our nurses into a 1% pay increase. How can we expect them to do anything on that? It's ridiculous. So I think to blame healthcare is not where we want to go. I'd love to see them doing a little bit more reading in their evenings off, yep. Especially since I'm writing it. If I can type, then they can read. And I think that's why we built the toolkit, right? That's what we were thinking. How do we get it into the hands of frontline, whatever that might look like? Whether that's police on the doorstep, whether it's medical personnel, whether it's an ER nurse, I don't care. If it's just everybody on the street, we all need to understand that this is real and that it happens and that we need to change the way we look at it. Sorry, that kind of rambled, but you got me on a hot topic.
It's exactly what we were offering in our world of Royal Purple, is to get it to the grassroots, get it into the grassroots.
Yeah.
And I thank you very, very much. It was very interesting.
I thank you, each and every one of you. Grassroots is where it's at, and you've got it rocked up solid here. I love it. Thank you.
Are we questioned out, commented out?
For question, that's okay.
Yeah.
My name's Andrew. How are you planning on involving and encouraging young men to become more aware?
What he asked was, how do we get more young men? And thank you, and that's my shame for not having mentioned it in the first place. Folks, this doesn't just happen to women, it happens to men. It's just, I look at women specifically because they're the ones most likely, just scientifically, physically, in an altercation, they're the ones who are most likely going to come out with brain injuries. So that's why I talk about IPV from a woman's perspective. The other piece of the puzzle on that, and we need to deal with this, we need to be open about it and we need to support it. Over 50% of the folks throwing punches have previous brain injuries. You want to talk about why we have a cycle of violence? This is where I get a lot of suspicion going on. I look at women and I look at supporting women, but it doesn't just happen to women. It happens to children in those environments too. And we can support those children just as much as we can support anybody else if we would just accept that this is what's happening and treat it as a health condition. These folks know how to support brain injury. That's what they've been doing for decades. They know how to support kids who are brain injured. What happens is that they don't get that support, they fall through the cracks. I can tell you where little Johnny, who's fallen off a monkey bar set in the playground, is going to be at 18, and it's not pretty. The likelihood that that kid is going to be involved in drugs and alcohol, in and out of jails, unemployed, on the street, it's depressing. But we can change that if we just intervene at the right moments. I think there are two ways to make a difference and to get young men involved. One is, let's start talking to them about what healthy relationships look like when they're about 5. Right? How many of you have raised kids? By the time they're 10, you're done. You just gotta hope that whatever you put in there is a good enough foundation that they come out the other side of teenage, whatever that is. Right? So we need to talk to them when they're little. And we need to talk to them about what does a healthy relationship look like? What happens when you hit people? You hurt their brains. And they need to understand what that means in appropriate language and appropriate everything else. Their little brains are, trying to figure out how to process stuff. But I think if we talked about it at a young age, and we do a lot of really good programming these days for kids around bullying and stuff in schools across this country. So I think we could be adding this kind of information in. And then I think one of the things that we should be doing when we support perpetrators is, and I don't even like to use the word perpetrator. I usually talk about people who throw punches. But one of the things that we need to do to support those folks is to explain to them what happens. If they think that all that happens is a busted up face or some cuts and bruises, it's not, we don't like to think about it this way, but that's something that heals and you get past it. But if they understood that what you're doing is potentially a life-altering disability that is permanent, that this is what's happening to the mother of your children, then maybe they think twice. We need to see men as allies, not perpetrators. Dividing folks has never got us anywhere. And I really do actually try to be the first one to say that. So thank you for asking that question. It's a really important one to be asked, and I did skip over it. So I'm grateful that you brought it forward. Thank you.
Well, another thing to that is that the Canadian World Purple offers a poster contest, and you might want to talk a bit about the poster contest, because the tool she's just talked about is actually, which is just a Bing idea, you see those with the big bubble and the idea, it just binged on me that what you just said we have been doing for a number of years in Royal Purple and need to make it far more important because it goes to the classroom of the children.
Thank you, Marvine. Yes, our winning posters are over there, and that is the influence that we have, the way that we have an influence on the kids who are in school is through that poster contest, and those are from grade 1 to grade 8. one of the winning posters is coming from either a grade 1 or 2 student, and it says, "When my brain is wrecked, I'm wrecked." That about gets the message across at the grade 1 level. Think about that though, at the grade 1 level, that's an understanding that he has. As we go home, and you have tons of posters like this is a statement that we are all going to be making in our communities. This is a statement we're going to allow our communities to make, the businesses in our community to make. When they support our Purple Thursday, they get to join in on our team. It's our statement, and it's our team. I think that about concludes. We still got another question? Oh, we got 2 more questions. Well, I don't need to conclude then.
This young man, we could tell him that he could join.
Oops. That's what happens when you speak to a group of women volunteers. And men, yes. Any other comments anybody would like to make? Here comes Arnie.
Hi, my name is Arnie Zimmerman. I just became a Canadian Royal Purple recently. I was installed by our immediate past President Barb, bless her heart. She never made one mistake. Anyway, when I joined, I knew very, very little about the Purple Thursday and didn't know much about it. And Darlene, you said helped me a little bit, but being the age I am, I don't absorb as well as I used to. But having come to this conventions and spending 3 days here and listening to all these wonderful speakers, and Sandy, you did such a hell of a job the first day there. I only fell asleep twice. But and your guest speakers, and you're all great. You know, this is we are such a great organization, and we do so much. And this Purple Thursday thing is like unbelievable. We can help if we really want to. We can help a lot of people who have got brain injuries or they experienced something in the past and they need help. And I think there are some situations where they don't look for help, and they should. Maybe they don't know where to go or who to ask. But I think we're going to change that, aren't we? Yes. Thank you.
You know the theme for the year? Can you say it with me? Yeah. It's our dream, it's our team. Yes! For all of you, safe journey home. And when you get home, begin to dream. Travel well.